I ain't giving a dime to those old geezers. All of my husband's inheritance is mine," she declared loudly in front of us. The woman making this bold statement was the widow of our late son, who had worked at a major apparel company and managed a store in a prime location in New York. Sadly, he passed away at the young age of 27 in a traffic accident, ending his life prematurely. My husband and I, while grieving our son's death, were busy with funeral arrangements. Yet, his wife, despite having just lost her beloved husband, didn't have a single tear in her eyes. Instead, she seemed only concerned about the money he left behind, not helping with the funeral at all and only talking about the money, which made me suspect and resent her even more. "Let's not talk about this now. There's no will, so everything will be divided according to the law." I tried to reason with her. But she twisted her face in an instant and screamed in a shrill voice. "What are you talking about? I'm just telling the truth. You want to take this to court? Go ahead, try me." She stomped her feet like a tantruming child right in front of the coffin where our son lay. Her hysterical and disrespectful behavior made me sick to my stomach. It was heartbreaking enough to lose our son, but being hounded for money by this greedy woman made me almost break down in tears. My husband, while efficiently making funeral arrangements, frowned upon hearing our conversation. "Stop, just stop, please. It's before the funeral. He was your husband, after all. At least let us send him off peacefully. If you want the inheritance that badly, take it," I managed to say, looking down. Hearing this, she seemed convinced she would get the inheritance and smirked in a vulgar manner. "That's it. Of course, I deserve it. Can't wait to see how much I'm getting. This is gonna be exciting." The nerve of her! I cursed in my heart. She stood there, looking down at me sitting and facing down. She won't be able to see it. That I have a wry smile on my mouth. I wouldn't let this greedy woman have her way. With a trembling voice, I slowly told her. "Yeah, I'll give it all to you. Everything, okay? My name is Mary. I'm 55 years old and have successfully raised an only son. He moved out as soon as he got a job, so now it's just my husband and me living a laid-back life. Our son's name is David. Ever since he was a kid, he's been serious and kind, always ready to help someone in trouble in town or take the lead in school events, rallying his classmates. He often got called upon by friends for advice, and he'd always be on the phone listening or rushing over to a friend's house, always eager to help others. David developed an interest in fashion and, after graduating from college, landed a job at a major apparel company. This company is a big name, with high brand recognition and numerous stores in commercial facilities primarily in urban centers like New York. It seems his personality, always putting customers first, suited the customer service aspect of his job well, as he was highly regarded in the company from the start. On the other hand, I hear that the workload is high and they live a busy life every day. Despite the heavy workload and busy days, he always found time to show his appreciation to us. For letting me live at home till I graduated college and for covering my tuition. It's my way of saying thanks, he'd say, and on paydays, he'd take us out for meals or arrange trips for us. For us, just having him grow up healthy was enough, but we were truly grateful for all he did. I couldn't help but feel proud of what a good person he had become. A few years ago, at the age of 25, he got married. His wife, Julie, was a woman from the same industry, connected through work. "Nice to meet you. I'm Julie. I started dating David after we worked together." She greeted us with a bright, shining smile. Being in the apparel industry, she seemed to take great care of her fashion and beauty, and she was very beautiful. "Compared to David, I'm still learning a lot at work, and now I want to support him properly as his wife too," she said. "You don't have to be so formal," I said, and she laughed shyly. Her smile was charming, and I liked her from the moment I saw it. I was genuinely happy that my son had married such a beautiful and capable woman. Even after they got married, our relationship with the son and his wife remained good, and they came back to visit us several times a year. During those visits, we'd have meals together, and those moments were always harmonious, filled with the warm conviviality of family. Jolie would help out in the kitchen and keep me company, truly standing by my side. She had a charming cuteness about her, and whenever she cracked a joke, it brought bright laughter among us. In the midst of this, my son was promoted and given charge of a store in a prime location in New York. Of course, we celebrated with a dinner at our house, including Jolie. Later on, whenever my son could take time off, the four of us would go on trips together, and I loved hearing about their happy life over the phone. Both the son and his wife, and we, were living joyful days. Jolie quit her job when they got married to support David as a homemaker. They talked about wanting to have kids soon. The thought of possibly seeing my grandchildren made my heart flutter with excitement. I believed this peaceful and happy life would continue forever. However, it all came to an abrupt end one day. My son, David, was involved in a traffic accident while on a work-related trip and lost his life. The call came on a winter's afternoon. Then my husband was at work, and I was at home doing housework. It was from the hospital, informing me about my son's accident. My face turned pale in an instant, and after calling my husband, I rushed to the hospital where my son was. When I arrived, my son was in surgery. Jolie was there already. We were met by a young doctor. Probably, the more experienced doctors were occupied with the treatment. The doctor, looking down, began to speak. "We're doing everything we can, but it looks like he was hit head-on by a large vehicle that ran a red light. The damage to his body is severe. Please, pray for him," the solemn-faced doctor told us before leaving. My husband arrived shortly after, and together we desperately hoped for our son's safety. However, a few hours later, we received the worst news. I can't remember much after that. It was inconceivable that our son, who was doing well at work, happily married, and had his whole future ahead of him, would have his life cut short at just 27 years old. I screamed and cried in front of his body, and spent a long time grieving in the morgue. Eventually, coaxed by the doctors, I managed to make my way out to the hospital corridor. It felt as if the whole world had turned black, my heart filled with despair. In a waiting room, just the two of us, my husband and I cried together. He was doing so well, and only 27. It's so sudden, he must be feeling so frustrated, so full of regret. My husband said through tears, his voice cracking. I was unable to move past the feeling of loss for a while, and my husband took care of various arrangements at the hospital, the funeral planning, and dealing with the insurance company over the accident. Amidst my confusion, I was deeply grateful for my husband's unwavering support. As for Jolie, losing her husband seemed to have shocked her deeply as she bit her lip and looked down solemnly. The one thing I remember is that she wasn't crying. Was it because she didn't feel sadness? Or was it simply because I was too overwhelmed to notice if she could cry? At that moment, my own grief consumed me, and I had no time to consider her feelings. But time waits for no one. We had to start preparing for the funeral right away, and despite my sorrow, I began to take action. My husband and I were handling everything, but something bothered me. Jolie, who had been staying at our house since yesterday, hadn't offered to help at all. She is still a member of the family as his wife. Logically, it would make sense for her to do what she could, especially since she had lost her husband. In the beginning of her marriage, she used to help me out a lot whenever she came to our house. So, I know she's not someone who lacks awareness from the start. What's going on with her? And instead of helping out, whenever she does open her mouth, it's about money. Hey, what's gonna happen to the savings he left behind? That's not something you say to grieving parents. I felt disgusted and couldn't help but glare at her. My husband was out meeting with the funeral director, so it was just Jolie and me. There's no will, so I guess it will be divided according to the law. But let's not talk about this now. We can sort it out later. I chided her. At that, she just slumped back in the sofa, looking annoyed. It felt out of place for a funeral, but her hair was so shiny and neatly done, it struck me as odd. But, both you and your husband are getting on in years, right? I, being young, will take all of my husband's inheritance. My hands stopped in their tracks. Her disdain for us because of our age, her audacity to monopolize the money citing her youth, and her bold declaration filled me with uncontrollable disgust. That's why I'm telling you, we can't decide that now. Also, could you help out a little? I thought it was a perfectly reasonable request, but it must have rubbed her the wrong way, as she frowned and leaned in aggressively. What? You old folks want your son's money that badly? How shameless. You gonna sue? Go ahead, try it. Her raising her voice and getting agitated brought not just anger but also surprise and sorrow to my heart. I stared at her in disbelief. The bright and kind person I once knew was nowhere to be seen. The selfish individual looking down on us, with a twisted face, seemed like a stranger, and I felt fear. Why had it come to this? I was dumbfounded, unable to grasp the situation. Is this really Jolie's true nature? Hey, Jolie, what's gotten into you? All you've been talking about is money. David was your husband. You loved him, right? Can't you show a little different attitude? Struggling not to burst into tears, I looked up at Jolie, who was glaring down at me with narrowed eyes. My son's portrait, where he was smiling, was displayed nearby. Why are we having such a conversation in this situation? What? A different attitude? Should I cry my makeup off for hours? Ridiculous. I never liked him anyway. He was just a boring guy who was too serious about everything. I only married him because he was a store manager at a big company and I thought I wouldn't have to worry about money. I felt like I had been punched upon hearing her confession. I always thought my son and his wife were so loving, and I remember teasing them about being so lovey-dovey. It seemed like my son truly loved her. Was all of that a lie? My fingers trembled with frustration. It's a pity he died since I thought he'd earn more in the future. But crying pathetically like you, that's something I can't do. No way! I was speechless. Was this woman looking down on me with such contempt when I was distraught over my son's death? It was easy to get you to like me. Before I met him, I worked in customer service, so I'm good at pleasing older people. It felt good to have fooled you so completely. Clenching my trembling hands, I stood up, glaring at her. Originally, I had intended to leave everything to Jolie. Considering she was a young woman suddenly widowed, we had our savings to fall back on. But after being spoken to like this, I was incensed. I no longer wanted to hand over my son's inheritance so easily. No, we will discuss this through lawyers. Just be quiet and focus on the funeral for now, I told her firmly. She clicked her tongue loudly, flipped her long hair, and stormed off. Jolie was oddly well kept, with expensive treatments on her hair and skin. And she owned many high-end brand items. I thought she was beautiful before marriage when she was working and keeping up her appearance didn't seem odd. But now, realizing she wasn't earning her own money. And all this was maintained with my son's earnings, a wave of disgust rose from the pit of my stomach. The funeral went as planned. He was a very loving son, and we were so proud of him. He could be happy in heaven. We just wished it as we cried, sending him off. When I told my husband about Jolie's behavior, he became furious. It's outrageous that she's been deceiving us and our son all this time. I thought it was our duty to help the widow left behind, but not anymore. He was so angry that he slammed the table, causing the coffee placed on it to spill. As I hurried to wipe it up, I looked into my husband's eyes seriously and nodded. It felt like avenging our son's betrayal. There was no way we were going to let that woman have her way freely. A week later, we decided to discuss the inheritance again with a lawyer involved. It turned out our son, who was diligent and practical, had saved a considerable amount of money without wasting his salary as a store manager. Hearing this, Jolie, who was present, lit up with excitement. Having shown her true colors once, she seemed to have no interest in pretending anymore, openly displaying her greed in an unsightly manner. $200,000. Really? I can inherit that, right? The wife is supposed to be the top priority in inheritance matters, right? The lawyer began to explain in more detail while Julie eagerly pressed on, not hiding her excitement. But a bank account wasn't the only asset. The lawyer explained everything carefully, but Julie, blinded by the prospect of the bank deposit, seemed not to listen, appearing distracted throughout. As soon as the lawyer finished speaking, Julie aggressively demanded from us. So, that means I'm the one inheriting, right? You two already have enough savings, and I have a long life ahead of me. Come on, that's fine, right? Even in front of the lawyer, though she didn't directly call us old, her lack of respect and self-centered demands were clear. Come on, just renounce the inheritance. You don't need it, do you? Overwhelmed by her high-handed attitude, I felt pressured despite my discomfort. Some time had passed since then, but it seemed her feelings hadn't changed. I had hoped she would come around and be willing to talk after some reflection, but that hope was shattered, draining all my motivation. She was dressed up beautifully today, too, as if she had just come from the salon, with her hair curled perfectly and her skin and eyes gleaming from expensive cosmetics. The designer logo on her conspicuously placed handbag on the table. Probably it was brand new. My husband sitting next to me was shaking with anger, seemingly on the verge of lashing out at her, but somehow managed to restrain himself. It was clear that convincing her was impossible. I didn't want any more arguments to drag on. We were at the depths of sorrow from losing our son, and I didn't want to prolong the trouble with a selfish daughter-in-law. I was too exhausted, both mentally and physically, to fight any longer. All right, if you insist that much, fine. We're old, and you're still young. Our son must have earned for a life with you, so the inheritance is all yours. Yes, all of it. I said weakly, and Jolie's face lit up immediately. That's it. The shamelessness of her response made me silently curse her in my heart. The lawyer recorded our conversation, and thus, my son's entire inheritance was decided to go to this arrogant woman. My husband and I, with resigned expressions, headed home without speaking to each other. An indescribable frustration spread through our hearts. We continued to mourn our son as the days went by. My husband went to work, and I took care of the house, life as usual. But there were no more calls from our son. No chance to hear his voice again. Every realization brought me close to tears. 3 months passed like this. The season changed, replaced by the lush greenery of new leaves. On weekends, my husband and I would go for walks in the nearby park or sit at home, slowly sipping tea while sharing memories of our son. In the midst of these bittersweet, leisurely times, the phone rang one afternoon. It was from an unexpected person, my son's wife, Julie. Since our meeting with the lawyer, we hadn't spoken or even seen each other. I thought they had no reason to contact us anymore, and frankly, I didn't want to see her face again. Yet, why was she suddenly reaching out? Curious, I pressed the call button. From the other side, Julie's panicked voice came through. Listen. A demand for debt repayment has arrived at our house. It's for $180,000. That explained it. During the meeting with the lawyer, there had been a concerning discussion. However, Julie, caught up with the thought of getting the savings, hadn't really listened. Knowing this, my husband and I had quietly renounced the inheritance and left everything to her. It's all my husband's debt. I didn't know about this. Do I have to pay it back? Did you know about this? Her loud, agitated voice was grating, and I sighed. The entire inheritance, including the obligation to repay any debts, has been transferred to you. When I firmly informed her, Julie let out a disgruntled grunt. The company my son worked for was indeed a major firm, but it seemed they had been struggling financially recently. The burden fell on the managers of each store. My son was forced into self-destructive sales by company directives. By purchasing stock for the store out of his own pocket to inflate sales figures. He was earnestly trying to protect the company, probably due to his strong sense of loyalty. Unable to refuse these directives, it's likely he accumulated a significant amount of debt while trying to follow the company's orders to protect it. When I explained the situation to Jolie, she let out a screech.
Debt from self-destructive sales. I didn't know about that.
You obviously weren't listening then. The lawyer did explain it properly at the time. What do you mean obviously? If you knew I missed it, why didn't you tell me? She retorted, her voice high-pitched over the phone. There's nothing I can do if you weren't listening. You wanted the inheritance after hearing everything. I assumed you were ready to take on everything, including the debt. I added, a bit spitefully. Jolie kept grumbling, grinding her teeth.
But you could have confirmed it with me. I even consulted the lawyer myself, but it's been 3 months since then, and now I can't renounce the inheritance. $200,000 in cash, but with a $180,000 debt that leaves only $20,000. With interest and processing fees included, I'll end up in the red. This isn't what I expected. What are you going to do about this?
I firmly told the ranting Jolie. No matter what you say, it's not my concern anymore. My son has passed away, and we are practically strangers now. If you're going to blame anyone, blame yourself for being blinded by money. Then, before Jolie could start on something new, I quickly hung up the phone. I couldn't help but sigh. How troublesome can one get even at this point? Thinking she would get a large inheritance only to end up with debt. She's free to panic and rejoice on her own, but I wish she would stop complaining to me, now a stranger. And to think, the wife of my son, who's already departed to heaven, turned out to be such a twisted person, it's sad. I wonder if my son in heaven is watching over this exchange. What would he feel? Anyway, whatever money came in and the debt, it's all up to her to deal with now. She's an adult, and it's not our duty to worry about her anymore. We'll likely never speak or see each other again. With that mindset, I decided to return to our regular life. I often visited my son's grave, reminiscing about the past while cleaning his tombstone and offering flowers. As the rainy season arrived, I diligently cleaned his grave each time it got dirty from the rain. And then, a few weeks later, one day, the doorbell rang. It was a weekday, and my husband was at work, so I stopped my chores to answer it. There stood my son's wife, Jolie, whom I thought I would never see again, her face twisted as if she was about to cry. What are you doing here, coming to our house? As soon as I did, she barged into the entrance and then started begging.
Please, lend me some money.
For a moment, my head spun. Why is it always about money with her? She looked up at me with pleading eyes from where she crouched in the hallway. I can't pay back my husband's debt. Right after inheriting, I got carried away with the lump sum of money. I went on overseas trips, bought several bags I wanted, and treated my friends. Because of that, I ran out of money to pay it back, and now it's turned into my debt. And? What about it? I said coldly. Everything was her own doing. Begging for my son's inheritance, getting excited over the saved money, not listening to the debt discussions, and then squandering it all on luxuries. Why does she need to tell me? Did she really think that after hearing her story, I would lend her money? To be this entitled is embarrassing as a fellow human being.
I already asked my parents, but after telling them everything, they said it was my own fault and wouldn't help me. I have to cover the cost of maintaining the house and living expenses, and I have no income. Please, just a little, even $20,000 would help. Lend me some money.
Looking up at Jolie, I told her with a cold tone, filled with a firm intention not to get involved. Who are you? Her face froze in shock. The widow of my deceased son is now a complete stranger to me. This is trespassing, and it's extortion. I'll call the police. Saying that, I reached for the house phone. She might believe I would actually call the police. She distorted her face in a mess. She gave me a fierce glare and then ran out of our house as if fleeing. I have decided I never had anything to do with her again. Jobless, accustomed to luxury, and now buried in debt. Deceiving her husband and his family, not mourning his death, her end is fitting for such a greedy, wicked woman. That night, when I told my husband about the incident, he took it very seriously. We blocked her number on our home phone and our cell phones and even got a restraining order against her through our lawyer. We also made sure to warn our respective families not to engage with her if she approached them. Eventually, Jolie had to repay the debt herself. Initially, she looked for a full-time job, but kept aiming too high and was repeatedly rejected. As time went by, her debt only increased, and she ended up surviving on low-paying part-time jobs. Due to insufficient earnings from her daytime job, she started working in the nightclub as well, but couldn't make enough money due to her age and quickly became haggard. Despite her situation, she couldn't kick her habit of indulgence and remained trapped in a cycle of debt. Eventually, she had to move out of her original apartment to a cheaper, run-down place. And then, the season turned to winter again. "It's cold, isn't it?" my husband said. That day was the first anniversary of our son's passing, and after the relatives gathered to pray, we were having a meal.
"Yes. I hope David is staying warm in heaven,"
I responded. "I wonder if our son, who was so earnest and kind, is still watching over us from heaven. Sometimes, I find myself hoping he's met some good people up there."
Despite everything, we still have a future ahead of us. It's truly sad to have outlived our son, but let's continue to live on vigorously together.
When I smiled at my husband, he nodded back with a smile. We will go on living. Without greed or pretense, cherishing the person beside us, living a calm life. The smile of our son in the photos around the room is very warm.